For those of you that haven't been here or that miss a class or two, there's a couple of the last two homework assignments are up on this front here. There's one that's the genogram that's right here on this chair. If you need it or want it, raise your hand and she'll pass them around. The other one that I gave out last week was the hurts and loss timeline. Also on the website at chucksugar.com, not on the church website, I've got these two documents on that website. You'll see links to each of them, and then there's the video. If you miss a class and you want to see what you missed, the videos are usually posted by the middle of the week. So these things are up there. If you miss one or you lose yours, you want to start over, feel free. And I've got another one I want to hand out in a little while. But I just want to just ask in general was basically the genogram, for those of you that were here or not, this is kind of what it looks like, and it's basically a picture or a representation of your family of origin. This is a fake one that I made up just so that it wouldn't be any of us. And this is kind of a picture of the timeline. This is, again, is a dummy one. So, but this is where I'm really, I want to explain in a minute where we're going, but just for those of you that did the timeline project, can you give me some feedback on what you got out of it? Again, don't air dirty laundry stuff that we don't need to hear, but just in general, was it difficult? Was it helpful? Was it painful? Give me a little feedback on what happened. Or whether you did it or whether you thought about it, still, just if you could just share things that you went through would be very helpful. Yeah, that's a real good point, because I think one of the differences between a genogram, which is a picture of family dynamics, you'll see rules and shoulds and stuff that we've talked about. You'll see patterns of behavior. You may mimic what they did. You may be reactive and do the opposite of what they did. But most of our development happens younger in life. But the Hertz timeline, the thing that I love about it is it's not just developmental time. It's what's happened in life. If it's been the death of a loved one or a rejection of people when you're in college or as an adult, whereas a genogram really won't, it might show, yes, someone's father died, but to see it on a timeline and begin to see the different things that happened is fascinating to me. But it's still, again, it's a grid. Here's your family of origin and some of those dynamics and some of the patterns and the rules and the shoulds. And then on top of that, you've got the hurts and loss timeline, which would have been missed if we'd have just stopped with genograms. So that's a real good point. Anyone else? Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think I would put all of it on there. And what I would say is if you go to if I'm looking at someone's hurt loss timeline and I say, well, tell me about this, and they go, I've kind of worked through that, and that really doesn't seem to be. I went through grief counseling, or it's been so long ago, it really doesn't seem. Now, some people will hide things and they don't know they're hiding. They're not hiding them on purpose. But I think any loss, any hurt, any disappointment belongs on the line. And if your line is 5 pages wide, that's okay. And it's not so that you can feel so sorry for yourself. But I would still put them on there. I think there's insights that can come both by making the line and looking at it later. What a lot of people, including myself, what happened for me was when I did that, it kind of took the stuff that was here and got it on paper, but then I started thinking, I think I forgot something. And it was the biggest thing, really. The biggest thing on the line, I had stuff for about 35 years, 40 years. And so I actually I think I told you guys, I went to EMDR therapy, and they want a chronological list of things that's happened, and that was on there, that one particular, and it was wonderful to have worked through it. And have that. It's not that they disappear, it's just that they lose we want them to lose their strength over defining who we are and how we see situations, or that we don't get triggered quite like we used to, so to speak. Well, they'll never go away, but they hopefully lose power. But so I would say, to answer your question, I would put everything on there. And then there's some things that are going to be monumental and some things that just aren't. But I still think if it hurt, I think it goes on the line. If it was something that you were really disappointed about, it goes on there. And if it's a loss, if someone died, or if you moved away from your town where you grew up and all your friends, those are still, to me, helpful. It's not that everything on there is going to just undo you. I hope that doesn't happen. So that's a great question, and I would say everything goes on there, no matter how long it takes. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Just looking at it, it's kind of like it allows them to have compassion for themselves, maybe for the first time. Whereas as men or even women, sometimes we're told, okay, I don't want to think about that. Let's stuff it back. We put it in our head. We put it in a compartment that doesn't have a door on it, by the way. Usually they're just stuck there because it's just too much. And like you're saying, being able to look at it graphically, I think it's a little overwhelming. I think we know what's in it. I think we all know kind of what's happened, but what we've done with those things is probably, or at some level, going to determine how we function now. So if they're all sitting in a black box back here, then they're still causing some effect to us, but that we're stuffing it and we don't want to. I'm above that. Or I mean, for someone that's come into my office and said, "Yeah, I've lost this, and this, but you know what? I've kind of moved on." And I'll ask, "How did you?" And some have moved on, but to ask what was your grieving process like? What do you mean? I just got to move on. I've just got to get on with my life. If I focus on all that stuff all the time, I can't, So I start getting hints that it hasn't really been dealt with. It's just been, you're grieving, you just haven't grieved it with it in a way that's going to actually help you get over it as much as you're ever going to get over it. Again, it's not that it's ever okay that someone's killed by a drunk driver that's a loved one, but there is a place of acceptance where you just move to a place where that's as good as it gets. It doesn't undo me like it did, but you've actually worked through it. So it doesn't mean you don't care about the loved one that's gone. And I think that sometimes is a protection of them. If I forget, maybe I don't love them, or I feel some shame or guilt. But I think that's a very good point. Yeah, George, you had something. Yeah, moves are huge. I have clients that I would say a move for them is the most traumatic thing that's ever happened, and I would put it up there at the same level for some as a rape, as a beating, as a burglary or robbery, whatever you want to call it. To them, it's here we go again in meeting new people. I'm an outsider. There's cliques at school. I'm not one of them. I really have, when I've done timelines, and the biggest thing on there was a move or loss of a pet. It's just it's amazing what moves do. It's huge. I appreciate you sharing that, because I would say that when you start seeing that over and over, you can come up with your own theme of what that means. But there's certainly a lack of stability. And when are we moving again? How do you settle in on relationships when you're probably 8 times out of 8 you've moved every so often, or someone that's parents are in the military, you're moving on. So why engage and when you're going to get your heart ripped out again? So I think that's a great insight. Thank you. Yes. Hang on. Yes. That's a great point. Everyone grieves differently. I've met with people that had a divorce because of an affair, and 5 years later, they're still as undone as it happened yesterday. And then we start a grief process, which takes a little longer because it's obviously meant more, or it's still unresolved. And yet some people can do it more quickly than that. But we're all different. I think that's a real good point to bring up, is that grieving, whether there's the 5 stages, and there's other people that teach that forget the 5 stages, but I see the stages a lot. And maybe it's 4, maybe it's 6, and maybe you're stuck on 2, but it can take a long time. And if we're just on a natural grieving process to where we're not really working through it, there's still a lot. It usually extends the period of time instead of. There's a lot of. We won't go into too much in the grief, but it's a pretty certain process. It's not magic, but there are things that need to happen to get through a grief, and a grief can be a job loss of a pet, a move, a really rough time in your marriage, thinking that your child is going to die or does, or parents, or divorce as an adult seems to be as harmful as divorce as a 10-year-old. So everybody, and some people are grieving and angry for years after that. So I appreciate you saying that, because it's to each his own. It really is. I have my way of doing it, you have yours, and we're all going to do it differently. And I think what you're saying even is, don't guilt yourself because you're still stuck in two, or maybe you're rerouting. I've got a real funny video I need to bring you guys. It's a Monk episode where if you've watched Monk, he goes through the grieving process in about a minute, all 5 stages, and then he goes through it again. I'll try to remember to bring that, because it's really pretty funny. But I sent it to one of my professors that teaches the grieving cycle, But in 3 minutes he's gone through it twice, and it's hysterical. But anyway, I would say the shame of you're not over it yet. I mean, this has been 3 years. I mean, this is and people don't understand. In fact, one of the part of the grieving thing is, how do people treat you? In other words, let's go to a movie. Let's go do something that kind of gets your mind off of it, which is horrible. At some point you don't want to just dwell on it forever, but to be moved on quickly. Our grief is very uncomfortable for those around it, and most people don't know how to be there with you through that. So I appreciate you saying that. That's good. We could spend weeks on that, and we might someday. So, anyone else? Somebody else had a hand, I think. Okay, thank you. That's where we're going to go, and that's very helpful. Anyone else? Yeah. I think getting a timeline of a parent or of someone else, it's a sibling or someone that you're in relationship other than each other, if they're willing. Again, timelines are. It's like I have the big disclaimer: if things were traumatic, don't do this, because if you start getting undone, and let's say you remember all of a sudden something. I don't do regression work and trying to get, I think you really were, but some people might, if they're open to that, and you see that it's helpful to them, if it can be used constructively. And the problem is, you don't know the future, so you don't know how someone else is going to react. But if it's this has helped me, but this would help me understand you better, would you be willing to do this? And if it gets crazy, stop. I don't see what it could hurt, as long as you explain to them, if something gets out of hand or you start going too much, just, let's stop this and we'll go back to whatever. I mean, when I'm working with a client and they start getting to that place where it's like, I don't know that I can do this anymore, I go, great, what else you want to talk about? I'm gone. I mean, I'm not going to press in. The harm piece is going from hurt and uncomfortable, is that little thing in there, to me, is very helpful. It's going to have to hurt, and it's going to be uncomfortable to do this exercise. But if it ever goes to harm, and I see someone potentially going there, or is going to go there or be harmed by this, if we keep going, I'll say, what else you want to talk about, on a dime. I won't even. I'm through with it for the day, and then and that builds trust with them. So if you've got that trust with this person, and y'all can do that, I don't see where it could hurt, but it could if it gets crazy. And when I say gets crazy, I mean all of a sudden they start realizing, they were raised by chimpanzees, and this is the first they've heard of that. So, but I think it would be. I think it's wonderfully helpful if you can really build intimacy through that, and especially if you go, if you take the angle of, because I really want to see why you're so messed up. I mean, I think if you take that approach, probably nothing good is going to come from this. But if it's, I'm really trying to understand me better, and I think it would help me to understand you better, because you're my dad, or you're my brother, or you're my mom. Was this something that you'd be willing to do and share with me? Because I want to be a safe place for you, and I don't have to tell, and maybe even tell them, I don't have to ever tell anyone this. It's just, this really is for me to help me understand you better and love you better. That type of approach might be more effective, especially if you're willing to do what you said you would do. Does that make sense? That's a great question. I have never heard that before, but that's good. Yes. Well, when I'm talking about regression, I'm not trying to help somebody remember something that they can't remember. And there's some people that really get in there, and then you find people saying, I realized I was raped by my dad, and then all of a sudden it comes out in the public, and then they realize later, I really wasn't. I think the therapist was really kind of pushing for. I've heard stories like that. Maybe you haven't. That's all I'm saying is I'm not looking for ghosts in the closet. I just want to talk about the ghosts that are out of the closet that we can talk about. I don't mean real ghosts, obviously, but things that we can recognize. I'm not trying to uncover some hidden thing. If it comes out, like mine that came out that was my worst one, it didn't undo me. And if it did undo me, which was possible, this was the worst. This was the most traumatic thing in my whole life. And compared to the other things that were really traumatic, this one trumped them by a dozen. So, but I knew I could make a phone call to a therapist immediately and go in and go, I'm stuck and I'm traumatized and I've got to get through this. But so that's what I mean by regression. I mean, we've all stuffed stuff, I think, and not all, I won't say all, but a lot of people stuff things. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about, I'm not trying to get you to remember something that either never really happened or you're not ready for it to come out. Does that make sense? That's a good question. Thank you. Anyone else? These are great questions, by the way. Yeah, I would say, what trauma is going to depend on how it affects you. In other words, I think there's a lot of levels of trauma, just like there's levels of grief, levels of happiness. But if you get to something that just undoes you and you find yourself crying all the time or depressed, you may have hit on something you probably have hit on something that needs to be dealt with by a professional. So that's what I'm saying. So if you know that you were, used and abused as a child, you might want to wait and do this with a therapist, because I don't want you undone to a point. It'd be like a surgeon saying, we need to take this kind of thing out of your shoulder, and you go home and get a razor blade and go, I can do this. This is nothing, and you start cutting and you go, there's blood like coming out and stuff. I don't want you bleeding. I don't want you bleeding to a point. I don't mind people hurting, and I don't mean that in a sadistic way, but we have to hurt sometime to get past something. But if it ever goes to harm and starts undoing you, so the level of trauma, if it gets so much that it's beginning to affect you very negatively, you can't work, you can't talk, you can't function, then you've hit something. And I would say run as fast as you can to somebody that deals in trauma. Does that help? I'm trying to be safe with you guys. This is not a counseling session. So if something undoes you on Thursday, and we can't deal with it in here, and all of a sudden you remember something that's so traumatic that you don't know that it undoes you. I'm just saying, if you know ahead of time that your past is so traumatic that you can't even, that this is not even a possible exercise, then don't force yourself to do something that you know is going to have a bad outcome. And since I say that more as a blanket statement of I just don't want you to hurt yourselves, and I can't be there, or a grief therapist can't be there to help you through it. So if there's any doubt in your mind and it's that bad, go to somebody and say, I've got stuff I'm kind of scared to talk about or look at by myself. Would you walk with me through a grieving process or a trauma process or EMD, whatever that is? That's all I'm saying. Does that help? So if it's you kind of know who you are in the sense that you know what happened, and if it undoes you to even think about it, for the love of Pete, don't do a timeline. So this isn't for everybody. I'm just saying all of us have been hurt, and all of us have been disappointed, and all of us have had losses. But if there are things you can think about without it undoing you, I'd say that's a pretty good sign that this exercise is a safe place to go. Any other questions, or anyone else want to give some input? I think this is a very safe place to talk. Again, I don't want to know the details. I don't want it to be that much, but just what the process was like, or these are great questions. Yeah, I think most people resist doing it, and because it's kind of like, well, it's worse than going on a diet. It's worse than a regimen, a workout program. But it's kind of like I avoid things like that until I've just had enough, and I realize, okay, I've just grown out of everything I own. I'm either going to, elephant-sized stuff, or I've got to, lose weight. And then I actually do something about it. This is worse than that, because most of us, or many of us, have put these things so far back, we don't want to talk about them. And we don't even want to think about them because they're that painful. So I think it is one of the most uncomfortable exercises you can do. Yet, I've seen it change people's lives in a way that I've seen something. I'd love to tell you a story. I think I'll bet you later, but I've just seen this break things open where nothing else did. But when people see what happened, they're like, I had never seen that. Not like this. I mean, I know all these things happened, but I kind of keep them. So, I don't think of about any one. I don't think of all of them at the same time. I think of this one, and then I kind of do something, and I think of that one. But to see it all, it's kind of I saw it the other day where it was very humbling in the sense of all the bull kind of stops, and you start realizing, kind of like what George was just saying, I see this now. Now I see the patterns. I was working with someone the other day, and the pattern, and they came up with their own insight. I just said, we did it. I had a while back, I had a client that came in, and I said, I'd heard that there was a lot of loss in their life, and I said, I think we need to do a timeline. They said, great. And so I, gave them a piece of paper with a line on it, the big gift. But and then they came back the next week and said, I can't really, I hadn't had time. It's been very busy. But anyway, long story short, once we actually did it I said, if you don't come 3 times in a row, I've been real busy. And I said, I think you're avoiding this. And he goes, no, I'm really not. And I said that if you don't do it next time, let's do it in here. And he goes, fine. So we did it. And then when we did it, it was unbelievable. I mean, it was more loss than I'd picked up on the genogram. And I hone in on genograms pretty hard. I'm really looking for patterns and things, but stuff came out that didn't make it to the genogram. And so for this person, I said, okay, I want you to just sit for a moment and let's just stare at this. It was up on my marker board. And then this gentleman said, this is unbelievable. Now I understand why I avoid at all cost rejection. Now I understand what loss really means to me. I see loss 10 times on here. I mean, it was crazy stuff. It was wonderfully, I don't mean crazy like, like I'm crazy, but I mean crazy in the sense that it was so helpful for this person, and yet I was watching them the whole time to see if this was going to undo them, and it didn't. It was really good insight, and I would even say this was my exercise for this person, and I haven't heard the results of it, so but I just said, take each one of these on a different day to God, and just say, Lord, I don't. Part of the tendency is, I don't really want to feel sadness. I kind of want to just move on. And I would say, don't wallow in the sadness of it, but don't move on so quickly that you miss the importance. If it's on the line, it means something, or you wouldn't have remembered it. I mean, if I remember something from 7 years old, it's important. If it was painful, it needs to be dealt with. So maybe an exercise that would be helpful is to go to God and say, Lord, I give this to you. I'm sad. This has been one of those things in my life that has very been hurtful, but you have borne my sin on the cross, and I feel shameful about this, but you have bought my shame with the price of the blood of Jesus. And so help me work through this and give this to you, and would you heal me in this area? And I wouldn't do the whole thing. I'd do one at a time and let God give you the healing that only He can give, which is the freedom of not ignoring it, but not wallowing in it, but handing it to someone who is your creator, your maker. Maybe it's something you need to be forgiven for. Maybe it's something you need to forgive someone else for. Maybe it's just something you need to work through, and maybe it's just something you need to keep turning over to God for the rest of your life. But to get Him involved in your healing process, I think is a good idea. So that's just an idea. Anything else? Let me tell you, yes. Yeah, I think it's cathartic as well. And for me, it actually brought up things that I remembered someone had done. When I was in that pain, someone that's very significant in my life comforted me in that time. And I had forgotten that. And in fact, I had seen them through this light, which was not such a good light. And I remembered these major times in my life, this person came and comforted me, of all people. And then to be able to, this Thanksgiving, I'm going to get to express that. But it took doing this to actually see that and remember good things that really were, when you're at your lowest point or you're grieving and boo-hooing over the death of a loved one, to be comforted by someone that surprises you, yet you start realizing all the junk kind of falls to the ground and someone comes to your rescue. So to me, it was very cathartic and very, very wonderful. And at the same time, I think a lot of us avoid it because we just don't think anything's there. But and whether that's some secret motive of it hurts too bad to go there, I just think people don't see the value in it. But I've yet to see someone do it that didn't see the value of it. And I like what you were saying earlier and Eric as well. The goal of this is twofold. Number one, it's for us individually to go and reconcile or work through, or whatever you want to call that, and understand ourselves. And as we get into this, I'm not going to go to my next slide because we're about out of time, and it would be another whole movement, but it helps me if I'm angry. Let's say mine is abandonment and betrayal, and somebody does something that triggers me back to that. Then if I don't know that and what where the timeline would show this, where maybe a genogram would not have, then when I get alone and go, Lord, help me understand why I'm this hurt and this upset. If I don't know this, I'm not saying He can't reveal it to me. I'm just kind of clueless because I haven't ever gone and done this. Having done this, I know what my main 3 tendencies to go are. I mean, it's very simple. So I just go ahead and start with those 3. Is it this one? No. Is it this one? Yep. And so I can get there much quicker. But if I don't have this information, it's very difficult. So for me, and we're going to get into the self-awareness piece a lot more probably the next time we meet. In fact, I have a homework assignment I want to hand out to you guys, but please before you leave. So I'm going to stop now so I can do this. But I think that is the second part would be then if you understand your partners, then you can move towards compassion to them in a way that maybe you never have before. And when I see couples do this exercise, it just goes to another whole level. Instead of trying to fix or solve, or that makes me uncomfortable when you talk about this, it helps me understand where you went and why when I said this, you heard this. So to begin to be curious of what you might be going through, not it's all about me, this seems to help a lot. I use it a lot in therapy to help couples get away from themselves and have compassion for the person that's hurting right now. We'll come back to you in a minute. I want all of your needs met too, but right now, let's focus on this. And it leads to listening and compassion and a lot of healing in marriages. So that's why we're doing this. Let me pass this around. This is something that I want to move towards. This is also on the website if you need it. I'll put it on the link on this page, but it's also just on my website. It's Understanding an Issue is the name of it. But basically, I don't have I do have this. You can see this, I guess. Y'all see anything? Okay, you'll see this. This is basically a way to chart the situation, the thoughts, the feelings, and the actions, and then your belief, which is kind of encompasses or overshadows, and I don't want to get too detailed. This all I'm asking you to do is take one of these. This is for 2 situations, and I want you this week when something upsets you, or over the holidays, Thanksgiving, if something doesn't come up, we'd like to come back with a blood pressure monitor and see if you still have a pulse. But if you can't think of if something doesn't go bad this week, I want you to think of something that you've been angry about or hurt about in the last months or whatever. I want you to learn to fill this out. I really want you guys to do this every week. Whether we cover this or not, I want you to get familiar with what's happened, what were my thoughts, what are my feelings, and we'll get more into the feelings later because thoughts just kind of happen. Feelings, many of us don't know how to identify what a feeling really is when we're feeling it. And then what's my belief? And there's a cheat sheet at the bottom. So if you have other ideas, there's no wrong way to do this. Just do it. And then the last thing is the action. So when this situation happens, this is what I thought. This is what I felt. This is the belief. I'm inadequate. I'm worthless. I'm whatever it is. And then what's the action? I shut down. I rage. I yell. I pull away. I leave. I throw things. I mean, I want you to get used to what happens. How's your brain working when things go bad? Where do you go? Okay, so trust me when I say at least where I'm going, this is going to be critical for you to get to that next level, and it'll make what we've just done, the genogram and the hurt loss timeline thing, become a lot more important because we're going to start breaking this down even further. So this is the start. So I would say, George, would you just pass these around? And you can make copies of it. You can get it on the website if you lose it or forget it or fill it out. Whether you do 100 of them or 1, it doesn't really matter. Don't worry about doing it right. Just do it. Again, the thought process is I'm angry or hurt about this. What's going on inside of me? What am I doing? I want you to get real familiar with what you do when things go bad, or when you're hurt, or when you're upset. Does that make sense? So please, of all the things, if you haven't done the genogram, I would highly recommend it. And if you haven't done the timeline, I would highly recommend it. And then this is going to be essential for you to understand where we're going And this is where I'm ultimately going is a new skill of communication. And if you get this down, you'll be much better at this than going, what was that? I mean, because I've got a lot longer one than this one. And if you've got this down, then you'll handle the rest of it much easier, and then it'll become very automatic. You won't need to carry paper around with you all the time. But I'd stick it in your back pocket, guys, and just after something happens, take a break and just try to jot down what's going on. And what I would say, I see a lot of people make the mistake, more guys than anyone, is I've got it right here. I remember it. I didn't write it down. Write it down. If you don't write it down, you'll miss something. I promise you. There's something about writing this down and seeing what you've written. It's kind of like the timeline. You know what happened, but when you do the timeline and you see it, there's an objectivity all of a sudden, and it kind of comes a little bit more real to you. So please do this. The people that do this, they usually get healthier because they're starting to kind of get what's going on.
What are you saying you need to write down?
On that sheet, you'll see it. Okay, write a situation. What are your thoughts? And don't edit. I mean, you can edit if you want to, but I wouldn't. I'd say I'm so mad I can't see straight. I can't stand my wife or my husband right now. I can't believe you did this to me again. Yada yada yada. I don't care what it is. You can hide these. And I'm not saying you're going to bring these in and share what you did. But this is when we get to communication. This is where it's going to come from. We're going to use information off of these sheets to be able to talk to your partner and say, when this happened, this is what I felt. And this is kind of the thoughts that I went through. And instead of them saying, well, that's stupid, then we're going to work through validation of what you're feeling and empathy and communication skills where there's a lot of listening, and you're going to be heard in a way that you've never been heard before if y'all will do this. I see it. It's just nuts, and I could go on forever, and I might stick around. But anyway, thank you guys for doing the homework. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you do. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Yeah, I'd do something. Just do one thing on the genogram. Do 5 things on the timeline. Whatever. Yeah, anything that gets you started. Everybody's method for doing things is different, or most people's are. Mine is I collect data very slowly, and then when I do, and then like for example, if I'm going to go, I went walking this morning. I put my clothes out last night in a certain kind of way, so that when I got up, I wouldn't have to go looking for junk. And then I kind of put it on throughout the morning while I'm working on stuff or reading or whatever, and then I actually go do the thing. So some people, for me, if I were doing this, I might do, well, let me just make a list of some things, and then when I get to the line, I'll just fill it in. I don't care how you do it, but yeah, we all, the procrastination piece. The problem is there's no penalty for not doing it. So for procrastinators that need a deadline, I don't have that for you. You don't get gold stars if you do it, and you don't get black stars if you don't. But if you want to get, if you don't do it, don't come back. How's that? Is that an ultimatum? I don't know. I want you to always come back. But if that helps you, I would love for you to do. I would just say if you do this, you can keep up with where we're going. I would say if you don't do this, you're just not going to get as much out of this. And I think this is, but you'll still get stuff. I mean, we're going to get into skills, but it's not, many of you know, communication and conflict resolution is not just skills. It's not, here's 7 ways to resolve conflict. It's much deeper than that. At least the way I teach it, it's much deeper than that. So if you understand all this about yourself and each other, I think you'll be able to go to a place of compassion much better than just pretending you're going there. Does that make sense? So I would encourage you. You do what you want. Like I said, I may bring some stars just for the fun of it, but I can't get around to doing it. So I've been procrastinating on that. Well, let me close this in a word of prayer. Y'all been great. Thank you for those of you that did it. Thanks for doing it. I think you will benefit, and it'll help you track with where we're going from here. But we're fixing to get very practical instead of just digging in deep. This was the depth where it's going, and we're going to start doing more practical things. So let me close this in a word of prayer. Lord, I just thank you I thank you that you were with each one of us in every hurt, in every disappointment, and every loss, that you've never left us, you never forsake us. Lord, I pray that you'll give us the courage to take these things to you. For those of us that are afraid to do this or can't seem to find time, Lord, if it's your will, I pray that you'll bring them to that place of doing it. If this is going to be harmful, I pray that you'll continue to stop them from doing it. I thank you for changing my life in these areas and the things that you've brought to my attention about hurts and how to deal with them, and the ways that you have healed places in my life that I never thought to bring to you. So thank you for your love. I pray for all these couples and families as they go to Thanksgiving, Lord, as we walk into our genogram for Thanksgiving. Lord, help us to have insight and help us to love people well, and help us to see where we're regressing back to, or I don't know, Lord, I just pray your will be done for all of us as we go into Thanksgiving, but that we can move towards those difficult people that may say hurtful things. Lord, help us to see that. And I don't know. I don't even know what you do that's so great, Lord, but what you do is always perfect. And I just pray for each of us that you know what we need. And I pray that you'll point out to us those things that we need to be convicted about and need to trust you in faith to go forward in. So I pray for protection for those of all of us that are traveling. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.